Hansen, and today I'm talking with Annabelle. She's a super smart programmer, author, and senior lecturer at MIT. Her computer science videos on our channel have captivated millions of learners around the world. Today we talk about Python, growth mindset, and rubber ducks. I have to know what the ducks are now. I can't continue. And I ask her, with the emergence of AI, do we even still need to learn how to code? What's the value proposition of learning a language like Python? Do we still need to do it?
So, not sure if this exactly answers the question.
Oh, tell me more. Find out her answer today on Chalk Radio. Hi, Anna.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. You're here.
Yes.
I'm so excited.
Yes, me too.
This is one of our pilot episodes for something new that we're trying, which is a video version of our Chalk Radio podcast. In many ways, it's an experiment. How do you feel about experiments? Are you an adventurous person?
No, not at all.
Oh, great. We're going to be great.
Yeah, I like stability and I like boring days.
Oh, well, I'm not sure we're going to have one of those with these ducks.
That's right.
So I actually don't know what the ducks mean.
Yep.
So I think you're going to tell me a little bit later. But I think we're in for an adventure and a little bit maybe of a choose your own adventure. Mm-hmm. So you're at MIT. You've been here for about 10 years. And you spend most of your time thinking about and teaching people who are new to programming, introducing them.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what that means to you, why you're interested in teaching, in particular, like people like me. What do you get out of that? And tell me about that experience.
So I recognize that I don't want everyone to become a computer scientist, but I do think that everyone should learn programming as a skill. So programming should become sort of like what math is now, where you kind of learn it in elementary school, and you obviously use it here and there in your adult life. But I don't know, when you've last used calculus, right? Like, we don't all need to become mathematicians after we've learned basic math. Similarly, I do think people should learn basic programming, but they don't have to become computer scientists. So the reason that I enjoy teaching students intro programming and exposing them to intro computer science is because it was really hard for me to understand programming when I first started, and I just always remember how tough it was. And I teach at MIT, and there's obviously a lot of really smart people here. And I think as you teach more and more, it's easy to forget how hard it was to start learning. And so, as an intro course, you might make the problems you give students harder and harder each year just because they get maybe boring for you. But it's not boring for the students. And I try to recognize that every semester. I just remember it was really hard for me. They've never seen this before. So it's really important to make sure that they have a really good experience.
You mentioned that when you first started programming, it was difficult.
Yep.
I'm wondering, what made it difficult? And then what are you doing in your teaching to make it less difficult?
I honestly don't know what made it difficult. The beginning was easy, just kind of understanding the basics of just, writing. The basics of creating an algorithm is basically three things. So the first is a sequence of steps. So step 1, step 2, step 3. Some sort of way to control the flow of those steps. So usually you go step by step, but at some point you say, well, if this is true, do this, otherwise do this. So like a branching kind of idea. And then there's also a way to control the flow by asking the program to repeat certain lines. So it's like, well, if this is true, go back and repeat this 1,000,000 times, which is very easy for a computer to do. So a sequence of steps, a way to control the flow of those steps, and then a way to stop. Those are the three things that make an algorithm. That's how you write a program. And grasping that was not hard. It was just sort of once you've gotten over that learning curve, it's learning sort of some of the more advanced concepts that were harder, some of the details for how that specific language works. So I started with Java, not Python, which was it's a lot harder than Python. There's a bunch of details that you need to think about there.
So I had the opportunity to watch some of your lecture videos.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And I noticed that you make space and time for students to practice, right in the class itself.
Definitely, yes.
Outside the class as well, but in the actual space where you're teaching. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, why you do that.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this before. I sort of see programming like math is now, but this will be, many years from now. It's a skill that people need to get that they don't have yet. And so if we think about the way we learn math in school, it's a lot of practice, right? You just always constantly practice adding, subtracting, multiplying, right? The kids. Yeah. So I think it's very important for students to actually get the time to do that practice. The way I run the class is sort of a flipped classroom or a blended learning style where students watch sort of the basics through video first. And then in the actual classroom, we do active learning. So I go over maybe something that's a little bit more confusing, and then I give them time to break with the hope that me forcing them to have them actually start coding, they'll be able to see, I totally understood what she was talking about in the video, and I can totally code that. But then when I'm forcing them to actually do it, starting with a blank slate, it's pretty daunting. And so I want them to get over that bump where it's like you have a blank piece of, blank editor or whatever, and then you just have to start writing something down. The more you do it, the more you feel comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. So there's all these breaks for all these activities that I try to keep the class lively, of course, and kind of indirectly have them practice these skills, like just write something down.
Yeah, and also that does two things, I think. It de-emphasizes perfection. You're like, this is practice. Like, yep. I think like an artist, right? So just like get a sketch, write a few lines, like just get something down.
Yes.
And then we can improve it.
Yep.
And then that speaks to something else you've mentioned before, and that's like growth mindset, and that programming is not like a gift and you have it or you don't, but it's really something that can be developed.
Yeah, a lot of, you see some people who are really good at programming, they didn't get good just because they had that skill. They were born with it, right? There's a lot of growth mindset involved in that. And anybody can reach that level of being good at something, programming included, just by lots of practice, trying different things, challenging themselves. So not just sticking to things that are obviously way too easy, because then you'll never grow. But you kind of, like, I don't know if you know this, the state of flow. It's like this chart where you kind of want to be in this like middle band, but kind of oscillating between doing things that are too easy and then challenging yourself and doing things that are a little bit harder. You don't want to always do two things too hard, because then that's discouraging and you'll stop. But you don't want to do things that are always too easy, because then you'll never grow.
I wonder if we could write an algorithm for staying in the flow.
Yes.
Like it tracks like, this is too easy for you.
Yeah, so
like, get in another...
a lot of the education platforms, right, are trying to give students, based on their responses, even in math questions, right, they'll be like, this student totally got all these, let me give them a harder one. And it's like, that was too hard, let me...
Yeah. How did you find your way to programming? Is this something that you've always wanted to do, or did it develop along the way?
So my parents immigrated from Romania, and we immigrated to Canada, and my dad was an electrical engineer, and then he went into software engineering. And being an immigrant parents from Europe, we were highly encouraged, my sister and I were highly encouraged to get some sort of engineering job, right? So it's just what is done. And so computer engineering or computer science, something along those lines, seemed to be the best option, given sort of where things were going in the future. This was the 90s. So just the beginning of the internet, the beginning of all that, right, that boom. So my dad recognized that was sort of what the future would be. And he said, you should probably learn to program and potentially go, and probably go into that sort of career. And I wasn't super interested in anything else, so I just said, sure. And so he taught us Java when I was about 12. I have a picture here.
Oh, yeah, let's see it.
Okay, and it's in this really cool frame.
Oh, I love that frame.
Okay, very fitting. And so this is very 90s. Right?
I love
this
everything
exudes
about it.
90s.
Yes.
Peak 90s right there. So we've got the room with the computer, right? Like as was in the 90s, you all had like the room with the computer.
Yes, yes.
And then like the big chair and the side ponytail or whatever. That's
probably
me
the
on
scrunchies.
on the left there. That's me.
Oh.
Yep. And that's my sister on the chair, sitting on the chair.
Yeah.
And that's when we first, or maybe before, like very close to the time that we had first started programming. My dad just said, here's some really basic things. And then I only got to the if, like the branching part of the control flow. I didn't really get to the repeating part of the control flow. So I made this choose your own adventure program where it was like, I forget what it was, like get out, exit a castle or whatever it was. And it was just like a bunch of if, else, if, else, if, else, if, else, if, like something like that. It looked really ugly, but I had a lot of fun doing it.
But in a way, you're helping people choose their own adventure today through programming, like gaining independence, critical thinking, doing things that they rely on other people to do, like they can do themselves. Like that's kind of incredible that you do that.
It's pretty fun. That's what I get out of it. Like I said, I don't want people to become computer scientists. I just want to empower them to, I don't know, like if they want to make their own app, they can totally do that using really basic computer science skills or programming skills, not necessarily computer science skills, but yeah.
So, controversial question. I asked you before the show a question, and I have not seen the answer yet.
Okay.
But the question was, in an environment when there are coding tools out there that allow people to build things, what's the value proposition of learning a language like Python to do that? Like, do we still need to do it? And what's the value proposition of doing it? So you're going to reveal your answer.
Okay, I'll reveal my answer. So, not sure if this exactly answers the question, but I said trust but verify.
Oh, tell me more.
Okay, yeah, I've definitely used Gen AI tools before. And even for really simple things, it can get it wrong, especially mathematical things and even programming things. And so I have sort of I would say a basic knowledge of programming. And I
have to interrupt you. I would say it's a little more than basic for everyone out there. More than basic. Continue.
And so I was able to start with what Gen AI gave me as a program, and kind of tell, you know what, in this particular test case, it doesn't really work that well. And I didn't have to go back and ask it to fix it, because that requires a lot more sort of back and forth with prompting. And I was able, to just fix it on my own. It wasn't that hard of a fix. And, as soon as you go back and prompt the Gen AI again and again and again, you start to introduce sort of variability of English language, right? When you're talking to someone online, it's really hard to tell what they mean, or, right, there's all these double meanings. And Gen AI is all probabilistic. So they're basically going to, pick the highest probability of what you mean. And then when they give you answers back, again, they give it to you with whatever the highest probability for the next word to be. That's what they spit back at you. So as soon as you introduce sort of that prompting back and forth, it can introduce errors that potentially stack on top of errors, misunderstandings, and things like that. So having a really basic knowledge of programming could allow you to maybe start with a piece of code that the Gen AI gives you back. So you're not starting with a blank slate. It's not super daunting to write it yourself, but you start with something and then you potentially test it and then debug it and then, figure it out. Okay, now I trust that it works well. Yeah.
I feel like the ability to verify is the human component.
Yes.
And that is sort of what creates the balance with AI. Like if you let AI make all the decisions, then you've lost your self-reliance, and you can't choose your own adventure because you're going to get a bunch of errors and it's going to lead you down the wrong path. So you need the knowledge to be able to choose a path that makes sense. Yeah. I have to know what the ducks are now. Like I can't continue. So.
Okay.
Oh, and a pig. Was that like noisy data or
this is not noisy data?
Okay.
So, every semester when we run our classes on Intro to Programming and Computer Science, there is one particular class that is on debugging.
Okay.
Which is the process of, you wrote a piece of code,
right,
and it's not running as you expect it to. So how do you fix it? That is the debugging process. And so a lot of times, a bunch of the errors might be things that you can easily fix, but most of the time, your program runs fine and it gives you an answer, but the answer is not what you thought it should be. That's kind of where programming is kind of different than English, for example, because in English, if you write a sentence, somebody else can interpret it however they'd like. Like one example we give to students is the chicken is ready to eat. What do you think about when I say the chicken is ready to eat?
Well, I'm a vegetarian, so I don't want to actually eat the chicken, but I would, because I'm a vegetarian, I assume the chicken wants to eat his food.
Okay. There you go. But I would assume I enjoy meat. So my take on that is I have a chicken on the table and I'm going to eat it. Right? So there's two interpretations to that. But when we write code, there's only one way to interpret that piece of code that is written. Right? So that's where things go wrong in our code, because we're like, well, it should work because in my mind, when I kind of thought about it, it's supposed to give me the right answer, but it doesn't, right? And so obviously the program is the one who's wrong because the computer is merely following the algorithm, the set of instructions, and there's only one way to follow those instructions. That's basically what that whole class is about. And then I bring out this big box of ducks and I say, programming is actually kind of creative because the solution to a problem, you could brute force a bunch of things, but you to scrutinize every single line of code that you wrote, even ones you think are correct. Most often, it's the ones that you think are correct that kind of are the issue. It's kind of like, where did I put my glasses, right? And you spend a long time looking for them and they're on top of your head. Yep. It's that exact feeling. It's like, where is that error coming from? And it's going to be something super simple. So the rubber duck is what helps you figure that problem out, because you're explaining it in very grave detail to something that doesn't know. And if ducks are not your thing, there are frogs
and
pigs.
Of course.
Or friends, if you want to explain it to them.
But friends can be judgy.
Friends can be judgy. Yes. So I used to explain my code to my son when he was 1. Yeah. When I had issues, because he doesn't know anything about programming.
Right. And so it's the act of talking it through. But you said it has to be in great detail.
Yes, you can't skip, because because you already, clearly your code is wrong because of you. And so, and so don't skip any details, right?
I feel like this is very much like life outside of academia. Yeah. 90% of the time, the problem is probably you, and it's like you have to figure out how to interact in the world or with others. Totally.
So I brought all these ducks, a wide variety. Yeah. So now I have a question for you. Uh-oh. Which duck would you like to keep? This is a hidden personality test.
Oh.
No, it's not.
We'll probably have to cut this because it might take a long time. There's an image in popular culture of a person working alone in the dark, with a hoodie and tap, tap, tap. For hours on end. That sounds intense. So there's 2 pieces. Is that accurate? And 2, do people work in isolation like that, or is it more collaborative?
So I tend to encourage collaboration.
Okay.
I have certainly put a hoodie on and the hood on in the past, just a leave me alone kind of state, mostly for, homework and things like that. But for students learning to program, I definitely encourage collaboration, because it's when you talk to somebody else, you kind of see their viewpoint. And in programming, I know I talked about an algorithm, but for a particular algorithm, or even just to solve a specific problem, there's a ton of ways to solve it. So I learn in the classroom when I ask students for how did they solve a particular problem, after I give them some time to think about it, they have so many different approaches to it that I would never have thought of. And it's important for students to see all these different approaches, because my way might not be the way that they think to approach the problem. So I encourage kind of working together, especially as you're learning. Now, after you find your groove, maybe it's not necessary, but.
Yeah, as an outsider to this, I didn't realize there was such room for divergent thinking. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
But the taking a break, so especially at a place like MIT, like I don't know if like taking a break is on the menu, really. But it should be, I'm guessing.
It should be, yeah.
And then I'm wondering if you can talk to us about like
coloring book. It doesn't have to be this one, but just something that gives your brain a break. But it's this idea of mind wandering. And this is an idea from psychology where mind wandering is not bad. Like if you're folding laundry, right, you're doing a very repetitive task. Your brain doesn't have to super focus on it. And so that's when inspiration comes, because you're kind of subconsciously thinking about other things, maybe problems that you have or, things that you're worried about. And that's kind of when solutions come, just like, when you're taking a shower, that's mind wandering as well, because you're doing a task that you already know how to do. You don't need to dedicate any thought to it. So your brain kind of dedicates thought to other things that might be worrying you or on your mind.
That's great that you've created that. Do you feel like programming is, like what's the percentage of logic to creativity when it comes to programming? Are we like 50-50, 80-20,
Interesting.
60-40?
Maybe 50-50, I would say. I think creativity comes into the process at all the different levels. So when you're coming up with a problem or something that you want to solve using programming, right, you have to be creative, right? So just coming up with that is mostly creativity. When you're deciding how to solve the problem or how to write the code, sort of maybe what algorithm to use or how to structure it or like what pieces to use and where, that requires some creativity, potentially, putting things together that you might not have put before, programming. You're like, I play video games, so, you're just constantly like looking for new ways to level up, but there's no cap.
It's really fascinating because unlike video games, most of them, like you could use open source coding languages and financial barriers don't come into play to get that area for growth and that dopamine hit of like leveling up. Increasing your skills.
It's just kind of a different, like you said, it's a growth mindset, right? It's a different way of it's different fun.
It's a different fun.
It's a different fun.
I'm like more and more, I'm like, maybe I want to try this fun.
Well, there's a book right here.
Get programming, learn to code with Python.
Yeah, so this I wrote a while ago. It's a book made, lots of things claim to be for beginners, but I wanted to write something that is actually for people who have never programmed before. So I think we don't even get into writing code to like chapter 7 or something like that. It's mostly kind of just setting up motivation, but not boring. Like I wanted it to read like a novel, right? Like you're just like, I'm just following along. So if you want to start, you could also, you could try this book. You can keep this copy.
Oh my gosh, I have to tell you a secret.
Yes.
So I requested this through interlibrary loan at my home library. And I asked one of my family members to pick it up. And I was like, just so you know, it's really for me. Like, because they would be like, why is she getting this book? This must be the wrong thing. I was like, it's not a mistake.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're learning a new language. Like, it's called a programming language, right? And it's basically learning a new way to write things that you already know how to do or how to write in English.
Yeah.
You're just structuring it in a completely different way in a different language. So the learning curve is steep, but don't get discouraged. With Gen AI tools now, though, it's easy to get started, right? That's not from scratch. So like I mentioned earlier, if you're stuck on a problem, just prompt it to give you a solution and then work on the trust but verify piece where you'll actually get valuable experience debugging, right? Because you already start with a piece of code. So like the confidence level is already kind of there. You're like, okay, I'm not starting blank. And then you can, try to fix it or agree that it works. And both are really valuable skills to practice as beginner programmers.
I love the idea of starting with code and practicing debugging.
Yeah.
That feels like low stakes and doable.
Totally.
Yeah. What have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
I want to know what games.
What games
you play?
Oh my gosh. Like video games?
Yep.
I like driving a lot, so I drive in the real life.
Wait, you do not. You said you don't like being stuck in traffic.
No, I don't like being stuck, so I like to drive.
Oh, I see.
So I also enjoy driving games.
Okay.
Not just around the track, but like through random cities and things like that. Escaping the police and, like the usual.
You have a whole other side to you.
Like Need for Speed?
Like GTA.
Need for Speed?
Like GTA.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Sarah Hansen, and today I'm talking with financial economist Andrew Lo, whose videos have been viewed millions of times on our channel. I ask Andrew how he makes a topic like finance accessible to everyone.
It's amazing how bad we are as Homo sapiens in managing our finances.
We also get personal about his own learning journey.
I have a learning issue. It's the mathematical equivalent of dyslexia, dyscalculia.
You do? And I get his answer to the question, should I use ChatGPT to plan my retirement? All this and more on Chalk Radio. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
For a long time, I've thought that if I don't have an advanced degree in mathematics, that I probably don't have a place in finance and probably shouldn't be thinking about it much. But I'm wondering if you might prompt me to think differently.
Well, not surprisingly, I have a very different perspective as a financial economist. Someone once said that to a person that has a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I'm guilty as charged. I learned early on in life that virtually everything at some point or another ends up being about money, particularly with regard to any kind of innovative pursuits for entrepreneurship or career-wise. At some point or another, you're going to have to deal with money. And then you need to speak the language of finance. Yeah. So that's what really motivated me to learn how to speak that and then ultimately be able to develop new words and sentences in that language.
Yeah, it is a new language. And it seems like it's something that everybody can.
I think that early on, I was really drawn to this field because of how impenetrable it was, and at the same time, how important it is. Growing up, I just remember always hearing my mother talk about finances and some of the challenges that we were facing. And I think that really made me hyper aware of the fact that it's really a necessary part of life. Sometimes, unfortunately, too much a part of life. And if we don't understand it, it's very easy to end up being taken advantage of or not being well prepared for the kind of things that finance helps you deal with.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. When I go to the grocery store and see cereals for over $6 and eggs sometimes up to $8. I mean, what are some theories of modern finance that everyday people like me could apply or think about when I'm faced with those situations?
Wow. Well, there's a whole bunch of ideas and important notions that we can use in our everyday lives. One of the key notions is that there's a trade-off among everything that we do and everything that we purchase. Far too often, we tend to compartmentalize, and we have a mental budget for certain activities as well as other budgets for other activities, and we don't allow them to mix. But sometimes, if you can think a little bit more broadly about the fact that we have a given set of resources and we have to allocate them across lots of different activities, and there are interesting financial ways of
across categories.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the heart of it, it's really all about control. But I think not enough people understand how finance works so that ultimately it ends up ruling their lives as opposed to allowing them to use finance to achieve the kind of goals that they really want.
So, Andrew, before the show, we asked you to respond to a question, which we will now reveal the answer to. So the question was, should I, Sarah Hansen, use ChatGPT right now to plan my retirement? What's our answer? Not yet. Okay. Please explain.
Not yet, because large language models are not yet ready to be able to do delegated financial decision-making for us. Turns out that saving for retirement is one set of activities, but then spending while in retirement, that's a whole different set of activities. And many of us have become good at saving, but we've been such good savers that we forget that at some point we need to spend. and we have to spend at the right rate for the right things at the right times. So what my colleagues and I are trying to understand now is not only what those optimal decisions are. I think we now have a lot of information about that. There's been a lot of research done on that. But the more challenging issue is how do we communicate that to people who don't have any finance background and moreover can't afford to hire the financial advisors that some of the higher net worth individuals have access to. So we're working on an AI financial advisor that can satisfy the most important criterion to look out for your best interest. We're not there yet. However, to look out for your best interest. We're not there yet. However, I believe that everybody should use large language models to help them think through retirement issues more seriously. For example, ask ChatGPT, what are the biggest issues that I need to focus on for my retirement? How much time do I have? What kind of ideas and products and services should I make use of? How do I get better financial information? How do I learn more about these problems? All of those things, I think ChatGPT can do a pretty good job at, but I wouldn't let it make your decisions for you.
Real question for you. I know a lot of times when I put in a prompt that's within my domain of expertise, some of it will be good, but some of it's kind of garbage and not all that accurate. So as a person who doesn't know finance, how do I know I can trust the answers that are coming back, even about those general type of questions?
Well, so that's really why you need to have additional time and effort employed in thinking through these issues, not just by yourself, but with friends and family. So we need human support for thinking about how large language models can work either well or in some cases not so well. And in any case, if you are planning for your retirement, at some point or another, you're going to have to engage with people from the financial institutions. They will be able to help deal with some of the so-called hallucination problems with these large language models. But the answer is like anything else that we do. How do you know that your doctor is always giving you the best information? Doctors are very highly trained, but they do make mistakes. So get a second opinion, get a third opinion, talk to your family members. Ultimately, you're going to be responsible for your own decisions. But the more informed you can be and the more you can check the accuracy of the information and look 40, 50 years ahead of a teenager.
It's kind of interesting because at least in the US, or at least in the cultural circles in which I grew up, it was sort of taboo to talk about money, how much you make, how much other people make, how you're budgeting. Have you found that in this context?
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the reasons why you want to have a fiduciary. You want to have somebody you can talk to about your deepest secrets, your financial goals, your constraints, the concerns that you have about losing your job or not being able to find a job, and be able to get honest advice about what to do about it. Many of us have good friends that we can rely on for that. But if you don't have a friend who has financial expertise, what do you do? So the hope is that maybe a platform, a reliable AI platform that is able to serve as a fiduciary can really help individuals with all of their concerns.
Yeah, it's going to be a game changer for sure. What are some of the dangers, pitfalls, or challenges that might come with leveraging AI to give financial advice to people who do not have financial expertise?
Well, any great tool can easily be abused. And I think we have to worry about the fact that if we have a financial planning tool that is AI driven, can that be abused? What if we were to ask this AI to engage in illicit activities for our financial betterment? Is that something that we should be able to do, or is it something that the AIs should guard against? You get into all sorts of tricky ethical questions about how these tools are used. And so I think that those of us who are developing the technologies, there is a big difference between that technology and the current set of technologies. And it's exactly what you said. It's about speed. The fact is that right now, AI is moving at such breakneck pace that within a very short period of time, we can actually have large parts of our population unemployed. And the hope of retraining them in time for them to make a difference for their lives can be very challenging given how quickly things are moving. So I think that's the one concern that the AI researchers are thinking about. We don't have any good answers yet. And one of the answers that's been proposed, which is to slow down the rate of progress, that's almost never possible. Even if you want to do it, even if you have legislation, there'll be people that will refuse to abide by that because legislation is not going to stop that kind of innovation. It's not going to stop people from having ideas and wanting to implement them.
Yeah, The idea of people being put out of work with the advancement of these technologies is hugely concerning. And I know one that you're concerned about because it seems like in everything you do, it all comes back to people and the impact on people. I'm wondering where that drive comes from. Where did your interest in leveraging finance to positively impact people's lives come from? Because it didn't have to. There's a lot you can do with money and not worry about positively impacting people. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I have to say that that was really not something that I had planned. Much of my early career was focused on applying mathematical and statistical models to investment problems. Really never dealt with death up close and personal before that. And so it was a big wake-up call. And through that process, realized that finance plays a pretty big role in cancer drug development. You know, I was pretty naive at the time. I just thought that if there was a patient in need and there was some great technology that could help that patient, that somehow magically money would just come sprinkling down and develop the drug. But when I looked into it, talked to my colleagues here in Cambridge, it became very obvious to me that that was not the case, that there were many examples of good drugs that could help lots of patients that will never, ever see it to market because there was not enough financing to bring that to the patients. So that's when I started thinking about how finance could play a role in that. And it was actually totally selfish. I wanted to figure out how to help my friends and family and how to get better drugs to them. But in doing so, it just made me realize the power of finance and the responsibility that we have, given that we understand the kind of things that other people don't, about how to finance certain kinds of projects, about how to bring money to a particular area and really make it go faster, that we also have a responsibility to take some of these ideas and implement them for those really high impact, high societal impact kinds of pursuits. So I started with that, and then one thing led to another, and I began thinking more broadly about how finance impacts society in general, and realizing that there are many things that we can do to further all sorts of different goals: climate change, energy transition. There are so many different issues that really are crying out for new business models and financing strategies. And these are, well-known tools that we right now in the business of transitioning, because it's not as if we're declining our usage of energy. If anything, it's growing. So what we need to do is to come up with new sources of energy addition as opposed to energy transition.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so what do you do with that? Where do you go? There are 3 totally green sources of energy that my colleagues tell me right now that are not in the renewable space. Obviously, solar, wind, hydro is important, but they're not always there when we need it. We need to develop better battery technologies, and that's all happening. That's good, but again, not enough. So if we want to speed up the process of energy addition, we need new sources of green energy, and there are 3. There's nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, and geothermal. And all of these should be areas that we pursue. And so imagine if we could support all sorts of different investment projects in all 3 areas and really make a concerted effort to develop these new sources of green energy. That's an example of what finance can do, but we need to develop the political will to be able to do that. And even part of that can be hastened by finance, because we can show that governments can actually save money in the long run by investing in these. If they can get a good rate of return on these investments, they're much more likely to be able to write the checks that we need now.
Yeah, it really does all come down to money.
Unfortunately, in most cases, that seems to be true. But fortunately, the world has become wealthier. And largely that's happened because of industrialization and the innovations in technology that we have pioneered. But the wealth is not equally spread. Yeah. There's definitely winners and losers. And I would argue that the wealth is not. During the pandemic, the stock market lost something like 30% in a matter of a few days.
Wow.
And if most of your retirement is tied up in the stock market, that was a really big hit.
Yeah.
So a number of people responded by what? By pulling out their money from the stock market, putting it in cash. That's in and of itself is not necessarily a bad decision. The problem is that many of these individuals, they took too long to put the money back into the stock market, and they missed the rebound, which actually happened just a few weeks after that 30% decline. The market went right back up. And if you had taken a vacation between, middle of March 2020 and middle of June 2020, if you had taken a vacation and done nothing, you would not even have noticed that the stock market moved. Yeah. It just went down and then back up. So I think that understanding these kind of dynamics is important because we often allow ourselves to engage in behaviors that can be really counterproductive. And that's part of what I do as a finance professional, is to understand how human behavior factors into this. And it's amazing how bad we are as Homo sapiens in managing our finances. And that's one of the reasons why I do what I do. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. You have a hypothesis. What is it called?
So my hypothesis is the adaptive markets hypothesis. And it was developed in contrast to one of the most popular theories in my field called the efficient markets hypothesis.
Okay.
That's a theory that says that markets always and everywhere reflect all available information. And that means that the prices that you see do scenario analyses in our brain. So one of the most magnificent gifts of human evolution is the ability to engage in abstract thought, in hypotheticals.
Yeah.
We can hold in our mind all sorts of what ifs.
Yes.
What if I decided not to go to work today? What would happen then? What if I decided to become a doctor, a lawyer? What if I decided to save money so that my kids can go to college? Those kinds of what ifs we can often work out in reasonable detail in our heads and then pick the what if that is the most attractive. So right now, if we're not in the middle of a financial crisis, we can do the what if and say, what if it turns out the stock market crashes by 20%?
Okay.
Given my age, given the likelihood that it's going to come back, because based on the last 100 years of history, when the markets go down, eventually they go back up. It takes a while, but we can actually see when things are recovering. What if I decided not to sell out everything? What if I decided to wait and see how things go? What if I were to wait 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Can I afford to wait? By doing those kinds of what if analyses, we can go a long way towards preparing for these kinds of events.
Okay.
And this is where financial planners are really helpful. Yeah. They have a lot more sophisticated what ifs than you and I might be able to come up on our own. And there, I think we can get AI to play a role, because AI now with large language models are remarkably good at coming up with all sorts of interesting what ifs. And so to be forewarned is to be forearmed.
We have a lot of YouTube comments.
It's a phenomenal school. But one of the things that I learned from Wrong Science that wasn't quite right, and this is my own fault, I identified intelligence with STEM. Yeah. So if you were smart at Bronx Science, that meant you were good at science and math. I mean, we had history, English, social studies, all of those other fields, but those weren't the real focus of the kids that went there. You went there because you wanted to study science, math, and engineering. And it wasn't until I got to college that I was completely disabused of that notion. And it happened because I met somebody who was completely innumerate. I mean, he wasn't even able to take the introductory math class in college and needed my help to get through it. And so I would tutor him every once in a while. And, he would eventually learn, but it took him a while and it was never easy. He really sweated it out. And ultimately, I think, passed with a C or something. And yet,
may or may not have been that person, but go.
Well, the thing about that person is that he was one of the smartest people I ever met in college. And I didn't expect that. And let me explain what I mean by that. We'd be sitting at dinner, and no matter what the topic of conversation was, politics, religion, music, anything that you would talk about other than mathematics, he was just incredibly well-informed, articulate, and extraordinarily analytical. It threw me for a loop because, again, analytical, math, but not in his brain. So he ultimately went to, and so I think that large language models is a different type. And so I think that large language models is a different type of AI than what we're used to. That's what makes it so powerful. But it does have some weaknesses, just like my friend who, if you asked him to prove a very simple theorem in calculus, he'd sweat bullets doing it. But he was incredibly intelligent in other ways. And so I think that opens up all sorts of new insights for me in terms of my own students myself and how we think about intelligence, and sometimes how limited we are in thinking about intelligence. We measure intelligence with tests, reading comprehension, vocabulary, and mathematical problems. But I wonder if there's many forms of intelligence that we're not capturing with those tests, and there are whole swaths of society that we have somehow neglected and underappreciated because they have an intelligence that we don't know about, we can't measure, but we really could benefit from.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I used to be an elementary school teacher, so I saw the ways in which schools pinpoint intelligence and measure it and leave out large groups of people.
Yeah.
So we're on the same page there.
Well, speaking of elementary school, that was one of the important and formative experiences of my life. It turns out that in retrospect, I have a learning issue. It's the mathematical equivalent of dyslexia, dyscalculia.
You do?
Yes.
Wow, that is so surprising.
Well, people say that because of what I do now. Yeah. But it was definitely the case that math was my worst subject. And, for an Asian growing up in New York City in the 19, just talk to the whole class about, how to make a battery out of lemons and magnets. And I think it was that experience that allowed me to get through my elementary years, despite the fact that other teachers that I had who were not so supportive were pretty discouraging, and to me and to my mother. Back then, there was no diagnosis of ADHD or dyscalculia.
Right.
So, I basically soldiered on until I went to high school at that Bronx High School of Science I mentioned.
Right.
That was in the 1970s when New York City was undergoing this radical experiment called the New Math. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it was a widely renowned failure because it was replacing the basic concepts of algebra, geometry, and trigonometry with all these mathematical concepts of groups, rings, fields, isomorphisms, and other transformations. And while mathematically it was more rigorous and intellectually more pleasing, most of the New York City school teachers were not prepared to teach in this way. And so for most schools, it was really a failure. But for me, it was night and day. I came from being a C student in math to an A student overnight.
Because it was more analytical and less focused on
numbers. No numbers. I to this day, I have a hard time memorizing numbers. I never memorize ahead, and it takes me a little bit longer than most people.
Yeah.
But when you replace numbers with equations, that was like a huge relief. It's like, wearing shoes that are 2 sizes too small. My own lens. The other part is that I've had the great gift of having a number of really incredible teachers. When I was a high school student, my calculus teacher, Mrs. Henrietta Mason, was amazing. When I was a college student, Saul Levmore, Sharon Oster, Herb Scarf, amazing. As a graduate student, Andy Abel, Jerry Hausman. I remember all of these teachers' names. It's because they just made a huge impact on me. They changed my life. And so part of why I spend time on teaching, and I think this is another aspect, some of my colleagues are so focused on research that they feel like they can't afford to spend time on teaching. But because I remember what it was like as a student when faculty didn't take the time to try to explain something in a way that would be more understandable, I decided to spend the time on working on my lectures. Someone once said that great writing is not writing so that other people can understand. It's writing so that other people cannot possibly misunderstand.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a very difficult standard to adhere to. But I think that's the same with teaching. Teaching is lecturing so that students cannot possibly misunderstand. And that does take a little bit more time. But, when you are able to land a concept with an audience, there is no better feeling from my perspective. It is like, I don't know, gymnasts, hitting a perfect landing, ice skaters being able to do a triple axel without falling. For me, that is, just an incredible feeling, a rush that I can communicate something that somebody, I think, gives opportunities that want to be able to. So I can't tell you how honored I am to be part of this and to be part of the institution that came up with this platform and basically gave knowledge away to the rest of the world.
You brought something with you today.
I did. So, when I was asked to come on this program, you asked me to bring a meaningful memento, something small that I can carry.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, that was at that was a terrible assignment. It just took me a long time because, what should I bring? Little art objects that my kids made, they're very dear to me. My high school diploma. But I decided to bring the most important reason for where I am today. And this is a picture of my mother.
Oh, that's
so
lovely.
I mentioned that, we grew up in New York City. We were a single parent household. She worked one job with overtime, to be able to raise 3 kids by herself. I was the youngest of 3. And instilled in me and my brother and sister a love of learning and the importance of hard work and focusing on the longer game as opposed to short-term issues, which was ironic because most of her young life as a mother was focused on trying to make ends meet. I would remember conversations about finance pretty much every single month, and it was tough because we did not grow up with a lot. And she was divorced. He was also the best thing about that marriage was that he was an absentee father because he was abusive when he was around, and so she dedicated her life to her kids, and held a menial secretarial position despite the fact that she was educated in law from China. And ultimately, I think, really put the 3 of us through school so that we could have the careers that we do now. I don't know that that's the right advice in general for women that are in that position, because I think there has to be more of a balance. But for her, it was just really important for her kids to reach the career goals that she set out for us.
What's her name?
Julia Yao Lo.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I really enjoyed getting to know you, and you've completely changed my perspective on what's possible in terms of my relationship to mathematics and to finance.
Good. I am honored to have played that role. Thank you.
About my teaching style, first of all, I don't write everything on the board. For the freshmen here, we're not in high school anymore. You need to pay attention and listen to what I say, not just what I write. So it's important to remember that. The second point is, as you can tell, I talk really fast and my handwriting is really bad. Okay? So please, please don't be afraid to ask what the hell I just said or wrote. Okay? If you don't know, chances are at least 40% of the class doesn't know either. We'll learn later this semester about the concept of public good. A public good is something you do which has a personal cost and a social benefit. I understand raising your hand in a class as large as this can be intimidating, but remember, in doing so, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping your fellow classmates. So please don't lean and whisper loudly, "What the hell did you just say?" to the person next to you. Raise your hand and ask me, because if you didn't understand, many other people didn't as well. More generally, it's hard to get class participation in a class this large, but I really encourage people to participate as much as possible. I've never had a year in this class where there's been too much participation. I've had every single year too little participation. So please follow up with questions, things like that. And then finally, the third point about my teaching style is I have a bad tendency to use the term guys in a gender-neutral sense. So when I say guys, I don't mean men. I mean economic agents, people, everyone. And I'm sorry, guys is a gendered word. Often, I don't mean it that way. It's just kind of economist talk for economic agents. We call them guys. What we're going to do today is talk about what is microeconomics. What are you going to learn in this course? What is the basic field about? And then we'll dive in next time into actually those trade-offs. So that is, microeconomics is really about trade-offs. Microeconomics is really about you can't have it all. So what are you going to do with what you can have? How are you best going to use your limited resources? And the key concept behind all this, the sort of probably I'm going to say about 100 times, this is one of the most important concepts in economics. I'm sorry about that, but this is really one of the most important concepts in economics, is the concept of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. Okay? And opportunity cost is the notion that every action or inaction has costs in terms of what you could have done instead, in terms of the next best opportunity. If you buy a shirt, you are foregoing spending that money on buying something else. So if you decide between shirts and pants, you buy the shirt, you're foregoing buying the pair of pants. If you study, if you spend all night studying, you're foregoing the opportunity to go see a band you like in concert, and vice versa. Every action you take is a trade-off. Every decision you make involves a trade-off because there's always an opportunity cost. There's always something you could have done instead. Yeah? Great question. Actually, let me come back to that in 1 minute. I'm going to come back to that. Or 5 minutes. Okay, so this is why economics is called the dismal science. We're called the dismal science because the role of the economist is to basically say, well, you think that's free, but it's not. You think you can just relax and watch TV, but you know what, by watching TV, you're giving up the opportunity. Basically developed the course I'll teach today and the course that's taught all over the world was developed right here at MIT. Modern economics was born here at MIT. Modern economics was born here because we introduced the tools of constraint optimization. Now, over here, I'm usually going to try to do like an outline of what we're covering. So we talked about course details, what is micro I just did. Now let's talk about how we do that, what economics does, which is we use models. And I'm talking about a model of what economics does, which is we use models. And I'm talking about a model of supply and demand.